Imagine paradise. Close your eyes for a moment and visualize the quintessence of an untouched island. Blindingly white sands meeting crystal clear turquoise waters. The gentle sound of waves breaking over distant coral reefs. A warm breeze carrying the sweet scent of exotic flowers and damp earth. Majestic palm trees bowing gracefully toward the ocean. It is the exact image that modern tourism brochures sell us. It is the perfect refuge, the ultimate escape dream for our exhausted, hyper-connected society. But now, I ask you to strip that image of all its romanticized Hollywood lenses. Forget the luxury resorts. Forget the satellite phones. Forget the smiling guides and modern medicine. Turn the hands of the clock back 2, perhaps 3 centuries. We are at the height of the Age of Discovery, or the dark and uncharted 19th century, navigating the unforgiving waters of the South Pacific, or skirting the impenetrable coasts of New Guinea. You are not a tourist. You are a castaway. Your ship has been shattered by the very coral reefs that once looked so beautiful. You are spat out by the ocean onto an unknown beach, exhausted, dehydrated, and entirely alone. And you have just washed ashore on a land that old maps marked with a grim warning. The Cannibal Islands. Why wouldn't you survive a single day in this place? The easy answer, the one pop culture has taught us to fear, is that you would be immediately hunted and devoured by bloodthirsty natives. But the historical, anthropological, and environmental truth is infinitely more complex, more fascinating, and, in a way, far more terrifying. Cannibalism, as we will discover, would perhaps be the least of your initial worries. Or rather, the culmination of a series of fatal errors you would inevitably make. You wouldn't survive, not just because of who inhabits the island, but because of what the island is, what you don't know, and the immense, insurmountable cultural rift that separates your modern mind from the absolute ancestral laws of the jungle. The journey we are about to take is not meant to shock. We are not here for cheap sensationalism or macabre descriptions. We are here to understand. To dive into profound human resilience, the genius adaptation of ancient tribes, and the rigid rules that governed life and death in places where nature reigned supreme. Brace yourself, because we are going to unravel why your modern survival instincts would fail miserably in the face of the relentless majesty of the past. The first major obstacle has no face, carries no spear, and belongs to no tribe. It is the island itself. The geography of isolation is a fortress designed to repel outsiders. As soon as you push yourself up from the sand, the illusion of paradise evaporates. The heat is not just warm, it is an oppressive force, a physical entity weighing on your shoulders. Humidity frequently exceeds 90%, turning the air into a thick soup that refuses to dry the sweat from your body. Within hours, dehydration is not a possibility. It is a mathematical certainty. You rush toward the tree line in search of shade and fresh water. Welcome to the primary tropical rainforest, the most unforgiving labyrinth on Earth. What is a supermarket and natural pharmacy to the natives is a minefield to you. You're thirsty and spot a pool of standing water in the foliage. You drink. In a matter of hours, microscopic parasites, bacteria, and amoebas, against which your Western immune system has absolutely no defense, begin to destroy your intestinal tract. Dysentery in a survival environment is a swift death sentence, draining whatever fluid and energy reserves you have left. But let's say you know how to purify water, or you find a safe running stream. Hunger begins to strike. The vegetation is lush, teeming with fruits, roots, and leaves. However, tropical botany is a science of life and death. You pull up a root that vaguely resembles a sweet potato or cassava. What you don't know is that many of these tuberous roots, if not processed, grated, washed repeatedly, and cooked through traditional methods passed down through generations, are loaded with hydrocyanic acid. Indigenous peoples have mastered the art of extracting the poison to turn toxic roots into vital nourishment. You, in your desperate hunger, would be poisoning yourself with every bite. And then there are the island's silent guardians, the insects. Mosquitoes are not just a nuisance. They are nature's bomber fleets, carrying malaria, dengue, and yellow fever. Without the genetic resistance acquired over millennia or the botanical ointments tribes use to repel insects, you would be a feast. A small cut on your leg, made by sharp coral during the shipwreck or a thorn in the jungle, will not heal. In the humid tropics, without specific care, that cut becomes infected within hours. attracting flies and turning into a debilitating tropical ulcer. Nature here recycles everything quickly, and a weakened organism is just more organic matter waiting to be decomposed. But let's imagine, by some miracle of human tenacity, you manage to avoid poisoning, find safe water, and endure the hallucinatory heat of your first noon on the island. You have survived the environment. That is when the true test begins. The shock of contact, the brink of the cultural abyss. You hear a sound. It isn't an animal. It's the rhythmic, hollow, deep sound of wood being struck. It might be a slit drum, a lali, echoing through the ancient trees. You have been discovered. The inhabitants of the island, hunters, warriors, guardians of their territory, have found you. It is in this exact second that your 21st century mindset becomes your greatest enemy. As a modern human being, you have been conditioned to believe in universal rights, in the diplomacy of a smile, in the premise that waving with open hands and showing submission will be interpreted as a sign of peace. You are about to discover that body language is not universal. Tribal etiquette in isolated societies is an infinitely complex tapestry where a single misstep offends the gods, dishonors the ancestors, and demands blood as reparation. You walk toward them, trying to smile, looking them in the eye to show you are not afraid, but also mean no harm. Fatal error number 1. In many hierarchical Pacific cultures, such as ancient Fiji or the Marquesas Islands, prolonged direct eye contact, especially toward a chief or a high-ranking warrior, is not an invitation to dialogue. It is a direct death challenge. It is an affront to authority, an insolent questioning of their superiority. In an attempt to communicate, you gesture, perhaps pointing at yourself or them. Fatal error number 2. Pointing can be considered the casting of a curse, a direct spiritual aggression. Your ignorance of the invisible social structure permeating the air around you is your doom. You are dealing with societies governed by an invisible, omnipresent, and unquestionable force. The concept of taboo or kapu. Taboo is the system of sacred laws, restrictions, and prohibitions that maintains cosmic and social order. It is not a suggestion. It is the law of the island's spiritual physics. Everything has its place, and everything possesses mana, the vital spiritual energy, mystical power, and prestige. Chiefs possess immense mana. Sacred objects, certain foods, and patches of land possess mana. As a stranger coming from the ocean, you are an anomaly. You do not fit into their cosmology. You might be seen as a returning ancestral spirit, which is not always good, a disease-bearing demon, or simply a being devoid of mana, less than human, a pest that needs to be eradicated. History has left us a brutal, real-world example of just how relentless taboo is, even for those who thought they understood the natives. Consider the story of Reverend Thomas Baker, a British missionary in Fiji in 1867. Fiji at that time was known by European sailors as the original Cannibal Islands. Baker was attempting to convert the inland tribes of Viti Levu. He had spent years in the region, spoke the language, and believed he was safe under divine protection and his status as a white man. But in a mountain village during a meeting, a tribal chief took a comb that belonged to Baker. The missionary, trying to retrieve what was his, reached out and touched the chief's head. To you, a mundane gesture. To the 19th century Fijians, a chief's head was the dwelling place of his mana, the most sacred part of his body. Touching a chief's head was the ultimate taboo, an act of unimaginable profanation. Reverend Baker's fate was sealed the instant his fingers brushed the leader's hair. He was killed, and his body was consumed in a complex ritual. Even his leather boots were boiled in an attempt to be eaten. Baker wasn't killed because the Fijians were hungry. He was killed because he broke the fundamental law of their universe. If a man who spoke the language and knew the people made such a lethal mistake, what does that mean for you? A dazed castaway, stumbling clumsily through sacred lands, perhaps stepping on a chief's shadow, another act punishable by death in certain cultures, or offering your left hand, frequently considered impure. Your very existence, if mishandled, is an offense to the gods. We then arrive at the central question, the most misunderstood, feared, and sensationalized aspect of our narrative. Cannibalism itself. Why did it happen? And what would be your role, as an outsider, in this deeply disturbing context to the modern mind? The word cannibal derives from the Spanish word canibales, an alteration of the name the indigenous people of the Caribbean, the Caribs, gave themselves, which European explorers associated with the consumption of human flesh. But the practice, anthropologically speaking, divides into two very distinct categories: endocannibalism and exocannibalism. Understanding the difference is understanding the essence of what your fate would be. Endocannibalism is the consumption of members of one's own group or tribe, almost always after natural death, as an act of mourning, reverence, and extreme compassion. Peoples like the Wari in the Amazon rainforest historically practiced endocannibalism because the idea of burying their loved ones in the cold, damp earth to rot and be eaten by worms was considered terrifying and disrespectful. Consuming the body was a way of assimilating the soul, erasing the painful memories of the deceased, and keeping the loved one alive within the social body of the tribe. It was a supreme act of love, wrapped in tears and deep sorrow. If you fell among a tribe focused exclusively on ritualistic mourning endocannibalism, they would likely have zero interest in eating you, a stranger with no familial ties. However, the historical cannibal islands of the Pacific, or the warring lowlands of New Guinea, predominantly practiced exocannibalism, the consumption of individuals from outside the group, usually enemy warriors, prisoners of intertribal conflicts, and yes, intruding foreigners. It is crucial to understand that this was never motivated by a need for calories. The Pacific was abundant in fish, pigs, poultry, and high-quality subsistence agriculture like yam and taro. Cannibalism was not gastronomy. It was pure politics, military power, and spiritual magic. In the cosmology of many warrior tribes, combat wasn't just about territory, it was about the transfer of power. When you defeated an enemy warrior, you didn't just end his life. By consuming him, you absorbed his mana, his bravery, his life force. More than that, it was the ultimate act of insult and domination. In cultures based on the respect of ancestors, being devoured, turned into excrement, and forgotten meant total annihilation, not just of the physical body, but of the soul. It was the destruction of the enemy's eternity. In Fiji, during the brutal conflicts of the 19th century, warriors used fearsome weapons like the totokia, a lethal war club designed not just to kill, but to puncture the enemy's skull cleanly, allowing for ritual extraction. The bodies of fallen enemies, known as bokola, were not considered ordinary meat. They were offerings to the gods of war, and there were highly elaborate preparation rituals. Special cutlery, cannibal forks, often carved from dark, polished wood, were used exclusively by chiefs and priests to consume the consecrated flesh, because touching ritual meat with one's bare hands would render the individual taboo, spiritually contaminated, and unable to perform mundane tasks. So where do you fit into all of this? As an uninvited newcomer mysteriously emerging from the sea, you are a dangerous enigma. You have no alliances. You do not speak the language. In the rigid power economy of these tribes, you represent either a spiritual threat, an easy trophy, or a timely sacrifice to appease the gods before a harvest or a major battle. If you showed aggression, you would be struck down as a military threat. If you showed absolute fear and weakness, you would be captured, not as a worthy warrior whose mana was worth absorbing, but possibly as a slave, or worse, as pua, a term that in some regions paralleled the word for pig, human flesh destined for feasts, where the goal was not the absorption of power, but the humiliation of the foreigner to elevate the chief's status before his own people. You would stand no chance in hand-to-hand combat. These men have spent their entire lives perfecting the art of ambush, camouflage, and jungle guerrilla warfare. Their senses are tuned to the snap of every twig, the shift in wind direction, the startled flight of birds. While you stumble, panting, dragging your wet shoes over exposed roots, they move through the undergrowth like liquid shadows. But history holds nuances, and anthropology is not a science of absolutes. There were, after all, castaways who survived to tell the tale. Men and women who were swallowed by the cultural abyss and, against all odds, emerged not as corpses in a ritual banquet, but as integrated members of these very formidable tribes. What did they do differently? Why did they live, while you, most likely, would perish on that fateful first day? The key to rare, exceptional survival upon contact with isolated tribes was immediate utility and total submission to a powerful sponsor. If a castaway had the immense luck of being found first by a curious chief rather than a patrolling war party, their life depended on instantly proving their worth, not as a threat, but as an asset. Some European survivors in the 18th and 19th centuries brought with them technologies the natives had never seen and wished to appropriate. A sailor who knew how to repair muskets and powder, who could forge iron from shipwreckage to make deadlier spearheads or superior agricultural tools, quickly became an incredibly valuable possession. He was adopted under the protection of the supreme chief. He became a pet foreigner, a technical advisor. His knowledge saved him from ritualistic death. But you? You are a citizen of the digital age. Unless you're shipwrecked with a portable forge, and you are a trained blacksmith, what do you have to offer? You know how a smartphone works, but you don't know how to build one. You understand the concept of electricity, but you cannot generate it on a deserted island from bamboo and banana leaves. Your modern skills, typing, analyzing spreadsheets, driving a car, writing code, are pathetically useless in the context of Neolithic survival. In the eyes of a society that values physical strength, the knowledge of tides, the ability to hunt boars with spears, and courage in battle, you would be considered tragically inept, an adult with the survival capacity of a toddler, consuming resources without contributing anything tangible. Beyond technical utility, there was the psychological necessity of radical submission. Historical survivors often had to abandon all their previous beliefs, adopt the local language with life or death urgency, participate in brutal rituals, and frequently integrate by fighting alongside their new masters in local tribal wars. It was the total extinction of the old self, so that a new self could be born within the womb of the tribe. Modern pride, the belief in your own moral or cultural superiority, had to be shattered. Would you be willing, or even able, to prostrate yourself on the ground, shave your head in mourning for a chief you do not know, or scar your body with tribal tattoos to be accepted? In the span of 24 hours, in shock, dehydrated, and terrified, this mental adaptation is a leap that very few Western psyches can make without breaking completely. And so, the first day comes to an end. The sun begins to dip into the ocean, painting the sky with shades of violet and blood red, a melancholic beauty that contrasts with the severity of your fate. The tropical night descends not like a curtain, but like a heavy lid. The darkness beneath the jungle canopy is absolute. It is a darkness you can almost touch, dense and claustrophobic. Without fire, which you do not know how to start by creating friction with the correct types of damp wood, nocturnal predators and insects take control. The temperature, which earlier suffocated you, can now drop enough to induce mild hypothermia in a body soaked in sweat and exhausted. The psychological isolation crushes your sanity. Primal panic, that fear rooted deep in our reptilian brain of the dark and the unknown, takes over. If you haven't succumbed to contaminated water, if the poisons of the flora haven't paralyzed your nervous system, and if, by some miracle, you managed to avoid detection by coastal patrols, or didn't inadvertently offend local spirits by disrespecting a sacred taboo, the sheer fatigue and shock of the environment will finish the job. The myth of the cannibal savage relentlessly chasing the noble explorer is a simplistic fiction. The reality is much grander and more humbling. The truth is that the island doesn't hate you. The tribe doesn't hate you. You are simply irrelevant to the perfect equation of nature and ancestral culture in that place. You are a gear that does not fit into the ruthless, magnificent machine that is life on the extreme edge of the human world. Studying the warrior societies of the past, their complex ritual practices, and their formidable symbiosis with the deadliest environments on the planet is not an exercise in morbidity. It is an exercise in profound anthropological respect. It is recognizing that humanity found ways to thrive in the most unforgiving corners of the earth by creating cultures of iron discipline, intense spirituality, and social laws made of steel. For the peoples of the ancient Pacific and the deep jungles of New Guinea, the world was a stage of spiritual forces in constant clash, where every action, from fishing to warring, was intertwined with the sacred and the profane. Exocannibalism was not the action of irrational beasts, but the cold, mystical calculation of societies that saw in the body of the defeated enemy the ultimate receptacle of human power. the definitive victory over oblivion. Today, these same islands and forests are home to the proud descendants of those formidable warrior lineages. Cultures have evolved. Violent ritual practices have been left to history under the march of time, religion, and global contact. Respect for ancestors remains, the concept of mana remains, but the expressions have changed, channeled into majestic art, modern stellar navigation, vigorous sports like rugby, and an unshakable sense of community. The next time you sit comfortably on your couch, enjoying the climate-controlled safety and walls that keep the jungle at bay, or when you plan your next trip to a tropical paradise, take a moment to look beyond the tourist brochure. Think of the hidden reef currents beneath the blue sea, the silent poisons of the green leaves, and the ancient ritual fires that once illuminated the darkness of those very beaches. Our civilization has covered us in invisible armor, but it has also made us soft. We have unlearned how to read the whispers of the forest. We have forgotten how to respect the silent gods of the earth and sea. Acknowledging why we wouldn't survive a single day in the past of these islands is not a declaration of defeat, but a wondrous, terrifying recognition of the extraordinary tapestry of human adaptation across the centuries. History isn't just what happened. It's the deep understanding of how the brutal, beautiful gears of survival shaped those who came before us.